As we come to the end of our journey through the world of windmills, let's take a final look at the profound, lasting impact these simple machines have had on our collective history. From their humble beginnings as a solution to grinding grain and pumping water, windmills grew to symbolize humanity's ability to harness the power of nature. As we explored earlier, they played a vital role in shaping medieval society, creating economic growth, building community, and changing the way people interacted with the world around them. But their story doesn't stop there. Windmills have evolved from rural symbols of progress to modern beacons of sustainability. Today, wind turbines stand tall, harnessing the same natural force to produce clean, renewable energy. The very principle that powered ancient windmills now drives our efforts to combat climate change and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. It's amazing to think that the same wind that once powered medieval mills is now providing the energy for our homes and industries. The circle of history feels complete, doesn't it? From the dusty, windswept fields of medieval Europe to the sprawling wind farms that dot the modern landscape, the legacy of the windmill endures in ways that continue to benefit the world. But there's something comforting in the idea that, while technology may change, some things remain the same. The steady hum of the blades turning in the wind is still, in some ways, the sound of progress, the sound of humanity working in harmony with nature. The windmill reminds us that sometimes, the simplest solutions are the most enduring. Whether in the quiet of a medieval village or the buzz of a modern wind farm, windmills stand as symbols of innovation, sustainability, and our enduring connection to the natural world. As we drift into the final moments of this history, let the image of the windmill stay with you. The sound of the blades turning, the hum of nature's energy harnessed for good. The legacy of the windmill is not just one of technological achievement, but of a human story that has spanned centuries, evolving with us, reminding us of the balance we must seek with the world around us. Now take a deep breath, and as the sound of the windmill fades into the distance, let your mind relax. The winds of history have carried us through, and as they continue to blow, so too does the promise of progress and renewal. As we reflect on the cultural and technological legacy of windmills, let's take a moment to consider the role they've played in shaping our environmental consciousness. Today, windmills have been reimagined as wind turbines, serving as one of the most promising sources of renewable energy. But the legacy of the windmill isn't just about harnessing nature for productivity. It's also about the growing awareness of our need to work with, rather than against, the forces of nature. The early Viking windmills may have been powered by nothing more than the wind itself, yet today's wind turbines represent humanity's growing commitment to sustainability and a cleaner future. In many ways, modern windmills, or turbines, embody a full circle of history. The windmills that once helped farmers grind grain or pump water are now helping us fight climate change. They serve as reminders of both our past ingenuity and our future aspirations. Imagine standing on the edge of a field full of towering wind turbines, the wind whipping through the blades as they turn gracefully against the sky. In this quiet, rhythmic movement, you can almost hear the whispers of medieval windmills, like echoes of a time long gone but still alive in the hum of modern progress. The global shift toward wind power marks a dramatic shift in how we think about energy, drawing from the same natural elements that the Vikings once relied on to power their windmills. The transition from burning fossil fuels to using renewable sources like wind and solar represents a profound cultural shift in how we view our relationship with nature. Windmills, once humble tools of daily life, now stand as symbols of the movement toward a more sustainable future. Historians and environmentalists often debate whether the global push for renewable energy is a direct result of historical innovations like the windmill, or whether it is simply the next step in our technological evolution. Regardless of the debate, one thing is certain: the windmill's legacy lives on, and its transformation into wind turbines is a direct link between the past and the future. The windmill's quiet turning blades have evolved into a powerful force for good in the modern world, helping us shape a future where we harness the power of nature for the benefit of all. As we move further into the legacy of windmills, let's explore the more unexpected places where their influence continues to echo. Windmills didn't just leave their mark in the countryside or in the pages of literature. In many ways, they've also found a modern purpose in the world of renewable energy. Today, wind turbines, the modern evolution of the traditional windmill, are used to harness the power of wind in a way that is both environmentally friendly and highly efficient. It's incredible to think that the same principles used by medieval farmers to grind grain are now helping to power our homes and cities with clean energy. The similarities between medieval windmills and modern wind turbines are striking, even if the technology has evolved dramatically. Both harness the wind to generate power, and both rely on the same fundamental principles of wind energy. But it's not just the technology that connects the two. Windmills and wind turbines share a certain beauty: the elegance of the turning blades, the way they rise above the landscape, standing tall and proud, their movements graceful yet full of purpose. Just as the windmill was once a symbol of human ingenuity and connection to nature, modern wind turbines are a symbol of our ongoing efforts to live in harmony with the environment. Picture a sprawling field of wind turbines on a clear, breezy day. The blades spin steadily, powered by the same forces that medieval windmills once relied upon. The hum of the turbines in the wind is almost like the old sound of the windmill blades, a rhythmic pulse that has once again become part of the landscape. In this sense, the legacy of the windmill is far from over. It has been transformed and reimagined for a new age, but it remains a symbol of humanity's ability to harness nature's power for the greater good. Historians still debate whether the ancient windmill's influence on modern technology is purely symbolic or whether it directly contributed to the development of wind power. Some argue that the principles of windmill technology laid the foundation for the renewable energy revolution, while others suggest that modern wind power emerged independently of medieval innovations. Regardless of the specifics, the resurgence of wind energy as a clean, sustainable source of power is a testament to the enduring legacy of the windmill and its place in human history. Let's now reflect on the fascinating cultural and symbolic legacy of the windmill. Although their practical use declined with the rise of industrialization, windmills have continued to captivate the human imagination. They've become symbols not only of rural life, but also of the passage of time, the relationship between humans and nature, and the ingenuity of past generations. The image of the windmill, its tall structure slowly turning blades, has been immortalized in art, literature, and even modern advertising. It's fascinating how these simple structures, built to harness the power of the wind, have left an indelible mark on our cultural consciousness. As you stand in the quiet of a modern day, surrounded by bustling cities, take a moment to imagine what it was like for those who lived in a world where the windmill was the centerpiece of rural life. Its presence in the landscape was a reminder that human beings were working with nature rather than trying to conquer it. The windmill's connection to the natural world gave it a mystical aura, something that was woven into the cultural fabric of medieval society. Farmers might have seen the windmill as a symbol of divine favor, a tool provided by the gods to make their work easier and more productive. In art and literature, the windmill is often portrayed as a symbol of the past, a link to simpler times and more honest labor. Perhaps the most famous example is Don Quixote, who mistook windmills for giants and charged at them in a fit of misguided bravery. Through Cervantes' work, the windmill became a symbol of idealism, struggle, and the clash between the old and the new. The image of the windmill, though deeply tied to medieval history, continues to evoke feelings of nostalgia, and in some ways, it has come to represent the transition from traditional ways of life to the modern world. Historians still debate the symbolic role of windmills in medieval culture. Some argue that they were seen primarily as tools, while others suggest that they held a deeper meaning, tied to the human desire to connect with nature and harness its power. The symbolism of the windmill as a cultural icon is clear, though, as it continues to evoke both a sense of longing for the past and a recognition of human achievement. Today, windmills, especially those in the form of wind turbines, are once again on the rise as symbols of sustainability and renewable energy. It's fascinating how something so old can be reimagined for modern needs. As we continue to explore the influence of windmills on medieval life, let's turn our attention to the decline of these iconic structures. As the Industrial Revolution began to take hold in Europe, windmills, once vital to rural economies, began to be overshadowed by more efficient, steam-powered machines. The world that had once relied so heavily on wind to power its daily activities was quickly transitioning into a new age of mechanization. While this shift brought with it many advantages, greater speed, more power, and the ability to work regardless of the weather, it also marked the end of an era for windmills. Picture yourself standing in the quiet countryside, watching as a once bustling windmill slowly becomes obsolete. The blades, which once turned rhythmically in the wind, now stand still, a relic of a bygone era. The roar of a steam engine replaces the soft hum of the windmill, and the steady rhythm of the turning blades is replaced by the clatter of industry. This was the reality that medieval farmers and millers faced as steam-powered mills began to replace their wind-powered counterparts. The world was changing, and with it, the role of the windmill in everyday life. While the decline of windmills was inevitable in many ways, historians still debate how quickly the transition occurred. Some argue that the rise of steam power was gradual, with windmills continuing to operate alongside new technologies for many years. Others suggest that the rise of industrialization led to a rapid decline in the use of windmills, as steam-powered mills quickly proved to be more efficient and reliable. Whatever the timeline, it's clear that the windmill, once an indispensable tool, was eventually overtaken by the progress of the modern world. Yet, even as windmills faded from the landscape of medieval life, they left behind a lasting legacy. The technology and ingenuity that went into building these windmills paved the way for the industrial advancements that followed. In many ways, the windmill represents the transition from the medieval world to the modern world, a symbol of how human innovation continually evolves, adapting to the changing needs and challenges of society. The windmill may no longer dominate the countryside, but its impact on history is undeniable, and its influence can still be felt in the renewable energy technologies of today. As we consider the lasting influence of windmills on medieval society, we must also acknowledge the unique role they played in the passage of time. Before windmills, the rhythms of life were dictated by the sun and the seasons. Farmers relied on the natural light of the day, working when the sun was up and resting when it set. But with the arrival of windmills, the pace of rural life changed. The sound of the windmill turning, powered by the wind, became a constant marker of time, regardless of the hour of daylight. Imagine yourself standing in a quiet medieval village, watching the windmill's blades turn steadily against the evening sky. The rhythmic hum of the blades became a kind of natural clock, reminding everyone that the day was moving forward, and so too was the work. The windmill was a mechanical timekeeper in an age when clocks were rare, and the passing of time was usually judged by the position of the sun. In this way, the windmill helped regulate the daily lives of people in rural communities. Farmers could plan their work around the windmill's operation, knowing that it would begin at dawn and end at dusk. The sound of the blades turning was as reliable as the sun rising in the east, a steady and comforting reminder that work was being done, and that the natural world was in motion. Historians still argue whether the windmill was seen as an early form of timekeeping, or if it was simply a tool of productivity. Some suggest that the windmill helped organize work schedules in a way that was previously unimaginable, while others believe that the timing of its operation was incidental to its primary function of grinding grain and pumping water. Regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that the windmill's steady rhythm became an integral part of daily life, marking the passage of time with each turn of its blades. It was more than just a machine. It was a constant companion, shaping the day and reminding the community that their work was part of something much larger. As we reflect on the windmill's role in marking time, we can appreciate how deeply it was embedded in the fabric of medieval society. In an age without modern clocks and watches, the windmill became the clock of the countryside. Its steady turn, powered by the wind, kept the rhythm of life moving forward, while providing a quiet, unspoken connection between people, nature, and time itself. Let's take a moment to consider the larger impact of windmills beyond the rural economy, focusing on how these structures influence the development of urban centers. While windmills were predominantly used in the countryside, they played a pivotal role in the growth of medieval towns and cities. The presence of a windmill allowed villages to produce grain quickly, efficiently, and in larger quantities. With this surplus, traders could transport the flour to nearby towns, where it would be exchanged for other goods. The surplus grain, once ground into flour by windmills, could be stored or traded, providing a stable foundation for market economies to flourish. Imagine a bustling medieval marketplace. Carts piled high with flour and grains line the streets, while bakers and traders haggle over prices. In the distance, you can see the outline of a windmill standing proudly on the outskirts of the village, the blades turning slowly in the wind. The windmill serves as the lifeblood of this marketplace, transforming raw grain into a commodity that fuels the local economy. Without the windmill, this exchange would be far slower, more labor-intensive, and less reliable. The ability to grind grain quickly and efficiently allowed urban markets to function at their full potential, creating a dynamic, interconnected system of trade and commerce. Historians still debate the role windmills played in the development of early urban economies. Some believe that windmills were a direct catalyst for the rise of urban centers, while others argue that the growth of towns was due to other factors, such as better agricultural techniques or improved infrastructure. Regardless of the debates, it's clear that windmills contributed to the expansion of trade and commerce, helping rural areas become integrated into larger, more complex economies. Windmills made the production and movement of goods easier, more efficient, and more predictable, helping cities expand and thrive. Even beyond the economic impact, windmills began to change the very landscape of medieval Europe. As these machines became more widespread, towns began to grow around them. The windmill was often one of the first structures built in a developing settlement, symbolizing the transition from simple agricultural living to more complex economic and social structures. The steady hum of the windmill, once a familiar sound in the countryside, began to symbolize the vibrancy of growing towns. The windmill wasn't just a tool, it was a cornerstone of the future, a symbol of the changes that were sweeping through medieval society. As we reflect on the windmill's role in the medieval social structure, let's take a closer look at the miller, the person who ran the windmill. The miller was a crucial figure in medieval life, positioned between the farmers and the market. He wasn't just someone who turned a crank and collected grain. He was a gatekeeper of sorts, controlling access to the resources that sustained the entire village. The miller's position was a unique one in the community, as he had direct access to the products of many different households. He was trusted, but also often held in suspicion, as he had the power to influence the flow of food and wealth in the area. Picture the miller's typical day. He arrives at the windmill at first light, the windmill blades creaking into action as the wind picks up. Farmers from the surrounding countryside begin arriving with sacks of grain, which they unload into the mill's hopper. The miller's job isn't just about grinding the grain, it's also about managing the mill's schedule. Farmers would line up, sometimes waiting for hours, and it was up to the miller to keep the process running smoothly. The miller's time was valuable, and his role in the community was essential. If the miller was skilled and fair, he was often well respected. However, if he was perceived as greedy or dishonest, he could quickly lose the trust of the community. Many medieval towns had regulations governing the miller's practices to ensure fair rates and quality work. These regulations were vital in maintaining a sense of balance in the village economy. Beyond the practical aspects, the miller also held an almost symbolic role in some communities. As the miller controlled the grain, he also controlled one of the most vital resources in medieval society. This gave the miller a certain level of power, but also a burden. In some ways, the miller's job could be seen as a balancing act. He had to navigate the tensions between his role as a vital service provider and the potential for exploitation. The windmill, which was meant to relieve physical labor, became a focal point for potential social tensions as it represented the intersection of nature, technology, and the human need for sustenance. Historians still debate whether the miller was seen as a revered figure or as someone of ill repute in medieval society. Some argue that the miller was often an outsider, viewed with a sense of mistrust, while others suggest that the miller was more respected due to his essential role in society. Either way, it's clear that the miller's role was complex, and the windmill was the tool that allowed him to both nurture and control the flow of resources. His relationship with the windmill wasn't just mechanical, it was a matter of social trust, economic stability, and the delicate balance of rural life. Let's take a moment to consider the cultural and social significance of windmills in the medieval world. While the windmill's primary purpose was functional, providing a way to grind grain and pump water, it also became a symbol of progress and innovation in rural life. In a time when much of Europe was still reliant on traditional manual labor, the windmill represented a leap forward, a symbol of human ingenuity and our ability to work with nature to ease the burdens of daily life. But beyond its technical importance, the windmill was woven into the fabric of community life. In many villages, the windmill was not just a tool, it was a community hub. Imagine standing in a medieval village, where the windmill is at the center of it all. Farmers bring their grain to the mill, share stories with one another, and exchange news from neighboring towns. The miller becomes a central figure in the village, holding a position of respect and influence. The rhythmic sound of the turning blades becomes a constant, grounding force in the daily lives of villagers, a steady backdrop to their work and conversations. It wasn't just the mechanical function of the windmill that mattered, it was also its role in fostering a sense of connection and interdependence among the people who relied on it. But the windmill also carried a symbolic weight in the medieval worldview. To many people of the time, the windmill represented not just human mastery over nature, but a connection to divine forces. The wind, after all, was a natural element, something beyond human control, yet the windmill harnessed it to power human life. This balance of power between nature and human invention was not lost on medieval farmers. The turning blades of the windmill may have been seen as a visible reminder of the divine order of the world, a world in which humans could tap into nature's energy to benefit their communities. This connection between nature, technology, and the divine was central to the medieval understanding of the world. Historians continue to debate the deeper symbolic meanings of the windmill in medieval life. Was it simply a tool of progress, or did it hold more profound significance for the people who relied on it? Some scholars argue that the windmill's place in rural society was symbolic of humanity's struggle to balance technology and nature, while others suggest that its symbolism was largely practical, grounded in the daily need for efficiency and production. Regardless, it's clear that the windmill played a central role in shaping the cultural and social life of medieval Europe, serving as both a practical tool and a symbol of the age's deep connection with nature and the divine. As we continue to reflect on the relationship between windmills and medieval life, let's explore how these structures impacted the rural economy. The windmill was not just a tool for farmers, it was a catalyst for local trade and commerce. By allowing farmers to grind grain more efficiently, windmills helped produce more flour, which could then be traded or sold. This increase in productivity brought significant changes to medieval society, particularly in rural communities. In a time when food was precious and resources were often limited, the windmill played a vital role in ensuring a stable and steady supply of grain. Imagine the small medieval village with its windmill standing proudly at the edge. Farmers from surrounding lands bring their grain, waiting their turn to have it ground. The windmill hums steadily, and the miller, having perfected his craft, uses the power of the wind to provide a service that was essential to everyone. For the farmers, the windmill was a key part of the larger agricultural economy, and the ability to grind grain quickly and efficiently meant they could focus more on planting and harvesting. This efficiency allowed for surplus crops, which could be traded at local markets or even sent to nearby towns, creating a vital economic link between rural areas and urban centers. It wasn't just the grain that was exchanged either. Windmills also played a crucial role in other industries. The same technology used to grind grain could be adapted to grind other materials, such as spices, salt, or even wood for construction. In some regions, windmills were used to pump water for irrigation, allowing farmers to expand their crops and improve yields. These innovations sparked further growth and development, transforming once isolated farming communities into hubs of local trade and commerce. The windmill was, in a way, the backbone of the medieval economy, connecting farmers to markets and ensuring that the cycle of production continued smoothly. Historians continue to debate just how much the rise of windmills accelerated the development of medieval economies. Some argue that they were a crucial component in the rise of medieval cities, providing the infrastructure necessary for urban growth. Others suggest that windmills were simply one part of a larger system of agricultural and technological advancements that made medieval society more productive. Whatever the case may be, there's no denying the importance of windmills in shaping the economic landscape of the medieval world. Without them, rural communities may not have been able to thrive in the same way, and the flow of goods and services might have been much slower. As we continue our exploration of the windmill's place in medieval life, let's take a moment to consider the quieter side of its influence, the sound. When we think of windmills, we often focus on their mechanical functions, the grinding of grain, the pumping of water, but what about the sound of the windmill? The steady, rhythmic hum of the blades turning in the wind was something that would have shaped the soundscape of rural life. To us today, the sound of a machine might seem like background noise, but to the medieval farmer, the sound of the windmill was a comforting presence, a constant reminder that work was being done, that progress was being made. The sound of the windmill was more than just the whir of blades. It was a symbol of calm, of the passage of time, and of steady, reliable effort. Imagine being a farmer in the medieval countryside, working the fields, and hearing that steady hum in the distance. It wasn't just the windmill grinding grain. It was the sound of your hard work being made easier, the sound of nature working alongside you. The rhythmic turning of the blades could have become almost meditative, creating a connection between the farmer and the forces of nature, between human labor and the wind itself. But the windmill's sound wasn't just a soothing presence for farmers. It also had practical implications for the rhythm of the day. The sound of the blades turning signaled that it was time to get to work, that the wind was right and the mill was ready. For those who depended on the windmill, its sound was a cue, a signal to get moving, to bring in their grain and take it to the mill. And in a way, the sound of the windmill set the pace for the entire community. It wasn't just about the work, it was about the rhythm of life itself, about the synchronization of human activity with the natural world. Historians still argue whether the sound of the windmill was a source of comfort or frustration for those who lived near them. Some believe that the constant hum of the blades became a soothing background to daily life, while others argue that it might have been a constant reminder of the labor that needed to be done. Either way, it's clear that the sound of the windmill had an undeniable impact on the lives of those who lived near it. It was a sound that meant work, progress, and the harmonious flow of life. Let's now turn our attention to the connection between the windmill and the landscape itself. These towering structures weren't just functional, they were also visually significant, becoming landmarks in the rural countryside. Imagine walking across a wide, open field, the wind sweeping through the grass, and in the distance, you spot the silhouette of a windmill, its blades turning slowly in the breeze. It stands as a sentinel in the landscape, a silent witness to the passage of time and the rhythm of nature. The windmill was more than just a tool for grinding grain or pumping water. It was an integral part of the natural environment, working in harmony with the land. The design of windmills varied greatly depending on the region and the materials available, but all windmills had one thing in common. They relied on the wind to turn the blades. This dependence on nature made windmills particularly symbolic of the medieval relationship between humans and the environment. The windmill was a structure built to harness the very forces of nature, wind and air, transforming these invisible elements into a force that could power life in a medieval village. This marriage of man-made structures and natural energy made the windmill a symbol of ingenuity, a reminder that humans could shape their environment without completely overpowering it. But the windmill also represented something deeper for the people who lived in its shadow. It was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life itself. The windmill's function was entirely dependent on the wind, which was not something humans could control. The weather could change, the wind could stop, and the miller would have to wait. This element of unpredictability, while frustrating at times, was also a humbling reminder that nature was in charge, and humans had to work with it, not against it. The rhythm of the windmill blades turning in the breeze echoed the ebb and flow of life, a cycle of productivity and rest, of action and waiting. Historians still debate the symbolic significance of the windmill in the medieval world. Some argue that windmills were more than just functional. They were also expressions of medieval society's relationship with the natural world. Others suggest that the windmill was simply a practical tool with no deeper meaning. Yet, as you stand there, watching the windmill turn slowly in the distance, you can't help but feel that it was more than just a machine. It was a part of something much larger, a connection between the land, the people, and the wind itself. As we continue to explore the impact of windmills on medieval life, let's consider how these machines shaped the rhythm of daily life beyond the fields. Windmills were not just tools for agriculture. They played a central role in the economy and social fabric of medieval villages. While the windmill was busy grinding grain or pumping water, its steady hum became a constant in the lives of villagers. It wasn't just a mechanical tool. It was a presence, a symbol of progress, and a community hub. Farmers relied on the windmill, but so did many others in the village, from millers to bakers to traders. Picture yourself in a bustling medieval village. The windmill stands at the center, its blades turning with the rhythm of nature. Farmers from all around bring their grain to be ground, lining up with sacks of wheat, barley, and rye. But it wasn't just the farmers who depended on the windmill. The millers, who ran the mill, were central to the local economy. They would take the grain, grind it, and return it to the farmer as flour or meal, sometimes charging a small fee for the service. The windmill became a meeting point, a place where people from different walks of life converged. The sound of the grinding stone, the whir of the blades, was not only a sound of progress but also a sound of community life in motion. Beyond the village, windmills also played a role in trade. The flour produced by the windmills could be stored and sold, shipped to nearby towns or cities, and even traded across regions. In this way, windmills contributed to the broader economy, enabling the surplus production of grain and its transformation into goods that could be exchanged. For a farmer who previously struggled to grow enough food for his own family, the windmill represented a means of reaching beyond his land and connecting with the larger marketplace. Historians still debate whether the windmill's primary impact was on agriculture, or whether it helped to catalyze the growth of towns and cities. Some believe that the spread of windmills was a key factor in the rise of medieval commerce, while others argue that the development of urban centers came about through other means. Whatever the case, there's no question that the windmill became a vital part of village life, shaping not just the farming cycle, but also the social and economic landscape of medieval Europe. Now that we've explored the construction of these monumental windmills, let's look at the true heart of their purpose: the grinding of grain. This was the aspect of the windmill that had the most immediate impact on the lives of medieval farmers. Before the windmill, grinding grain was a tedious, time-consuming task. It could take hours to grind enough flour by hand using a mortar and pestle, leaving farmers with little time for anything else. But with the advent of windmills, this process became faster, more efficient, and far less physically demanding. The windmill wasn't just a technological breakthrough, it was a game-changer for food production and, by extension, society as a whole. Imagine a farmer arriving at the windmill with a sack of grain. The blades of the windmill are turning slowly in the breeze, and the sound of the grinding stone fills the air. The farmer pours the grain into the hopper at the top of the mill, and the windmill's rotation begins the grinding process. The millstone below crushes the grain into flour, a process that once took hours now accomplished in mere minutes. The hum of the windmill, the steady rhythm of the grinding stone, becomes a comforting soundtrack to the farmer's daily routine. There's no rush, the windmill does the work, and the farmer can take a moment to relax, knowing that the food they rely on is being prepared with minimal effort. The importance of this new efficiency cannot be overstated. With windmills, farmers could grind flour faster and in greater quantities, enabling them to store food for the winter or sell it at market. It also allowed for surplus grain to be processed and traded, supporting local economies and helping rural areas thrive. For the first time, rural communities could produce more food than they needed, which led to population growth and a stronger, more interconnected society. The windmill didn't just make life easier, it allowed society to grow, to innovate, and to expand. Historians still argue whether windmills were the driving force behind the agricultural revolution in medieval Europe, or whether they were simply one piece of a larger puzzle. Some scholars believe that the efficiency brought by windmills played a critical role in the increase in food production and the rise of urban centers, while others suggest that it was other factors, such as new farming techniques or better crop varieties, that had a greater impact. Regardless, there's no denying the windmill's role in shaping the way that medieval people lived and worked, particularly in the way it transformed the daily life of the farmer. Now that we've explored the materials and craftsmanship behind the windmills, let's shift our focus to the actual process of building one. The construction of a windmill was no small task, especially considering the limited tools and resources medieval builders had at their disposal. Imagine the sheer labor involved: assembling timber beams, setting massive stone foundations, and crafting the windmill's blades, each piece requiring not just physical strength, but careful planning and skill. These windmill builders weren't just skilled craftsmen, they were problem solvers, understanding the intricacies of wind, mechanical design, and structural stability. The first step in building a windmill would have been choosing the ideal location. Ideally, the windmill had to be placed where the wind was most consistent, usually on a hill or open plain where nothing obstructed the flow of air. Once the site was chosen, the foundation had to be laid, often using heavy stones to ensure that the windmill could stand tall and withstand the forces of nature. Then came the frame, often built using strong oak or pine, timber that could support the weight of the rotating blades and gears. This wasn't a job that could be done by one person alone. It required the effort of many, all working together to lift, assemble, and secure the heavy pieces of wood. As you watch the windmill take shape before you, you can imagine the sounds of axes chopping, the hum of rope being pulled tight, and the occasional shout of coordination as the heavy stones and beams are lifted into place. The blades themselves would be carefully shaped and attached to the frame, their angles set just right to catch the wind and start the grinding process. Once the blades were affixed, the windmill was ready to begin its slow, steady turn, bringing life to the surrounding farmland. Historians still debate whether the windmill construction process varied greatly from region to region, or if there was a universal method for building these machines. Some suggest that local traditions and materials influenced how each windmill was built, while others believe that the method was standardized, with a specific blueprint followed throughout medieval Europe. Regardless of the differences, one thing is clear. The construction of a windmill was an intricate, communal effort that brought together people of all trades, from carpenters and masons to engineers and laborers. The windmill wasn't just a technological marvel. It was a symbol of collaboration, resourcefulness, and the human ability to harness the natural world. Let's now take a closer look at the materials that made these windmills such powerful tools of change. While we often think of windmills as towering structures of wood and stone, it's the humble materials they were built from that allowed them to withstand the test of time. Imagine yourself standing beside one of these medieval giants, your hand tracing the grain of the wood used in its construction, feeling the solid heft of the timber and the roughness of the stone foundation beneath your feet. Every material used in the windmill's construction had to be chosen with care, as it had to endure both the power of the wind and the wear and tear of everyday use. The blades, often made of timber, were carefully carved and shaped to catch the wind just right, allowing the windmill to turn with maximum efficiency. The beams and the structure that held the blades were also made from local wood, often oak or pine, both of which were strong enough to withstand the heavy forces at play. The gears and other moving parts of the windmill required precise craftsmanship, and it's no surprise that many windmill builders became highly skilled in working with wood, stone, and iron. They didn't have the luxury of modern tools, so their ability to craft such complex mechanisms with basic materials is a testament to their ingenuity and dedication. The millstones themselves were typically made of stone, carefully chosen for their durability and grinding ability. These stones would have been heavy, rough, and coarse, designed to crush grain with great force. The process of carving and shaping these stones must have been painstaking, requiring precision to ensure the proper grinding action. And yet, these stones were key to the mill's success. Without them, the windmill would have been little more than a structure, without the function that made it so essential to medieval farming. Historians still argue whether the windmill was truly a product of innovation, or whether it was just a gradual evolution of earlier technologies. Some believe that windmills were a direct result of the need for more efficient tools in an increasingly productive agricultural society. Others argue that they were simply a reflection of the Viking and medieval spirit of resourcefulness, the product of people making do with what they had. Either way, it's clear that windmills were carefully crafted, using materials that were not only practical but deeply embedded in the world around them. Now let's delve into the magical connection that medieval farmers had with the sound of the windmill's blades. For us, today, the whir of machinery or the hum of engines might just be background noise, but for the medieval farmer, the sound of the windmill was something much more profound. Imagine being out in the fields, your hands covered in earth, working the soil, and all the while, you hear the steady turning of the windmill blades in the distance. To the modern ear, it may sound like the buzz of a machine, but to the medieval farmer, it was a rhythmic lullaby, a signal that life was moving forward, that the work was being done, and that nature itself was at play. That sound, almost hypnotic in its consistency, became a constant companion to the farmer's daily routines. And the real magic of this sound was that it wasn't just functional, it was comforting. The rhythmic turning of the blades, in sync with the farmer's work, created a quiet connection between human effort and nature's forces. There's something deeply soothing about this, knowing that you're working alongside something so dependable, something that never rushes, that simply turns in time with the breeze. The windmill was more than just a tool. It was a source of serenity in the otherwise chaotic life of medieval farming. Historians still debate the full extent of the spiritual and psychological impact windmills had on medieval farmers. Did they truly find comfort in the sound, or was it simply the mechanical hum of a necessary tool? Some scholars argue that windmills were as much psychological tools as they were physical ones, helping farmers maintain a sense of connection to their environment and their work. Others suggest that the comforting hum was merely a byproduct of the repetitive, soothing nature of the windmill's operation. But regardless of the interpretation, one thing remains certain. The sound of the windmill was far more than just a background noise. It was a companion, a constant presence in the lives of medieval farmers, offering both practical assistance and a touch of peacefulness. And let's not forget the simple joy the farmers must have felt, knowing that their hard work was being made easier by the turning of those blades. The blades didn't just grind grain, they ground the burdens of daily life, making the physical labor a little less daunting. With every turn, the windmill transformed work into something more manageable, more connected to the flow of nature. As the wind picked up and the blades turned faster, It must have been a comforting reminder that nature was working for them, not just against them. This connection to the land, to the wind, and to the machine became an integral part of the medieval farming experience. Let's now take a closer look at how windmills shaped not just the farming landscape, but the social fabric of medieval communities. Windmills weren't just tools for individual farmers. They were often community-driven projects that brought people together. In rural areas where land was shared or owned communally, building a windmill could become a collective effort. Picture it, the entire village working together, crafting the wooden beams, securing the sails, and assembling the structure that would become their life-saving machine. As the windmill started to turn, so did the wheels of a community, spinning not just grain, but unity and cooperation. But the windmill wasn't just about manual labor. It was also a new way of thinking about time. Before the windmill, the grinding of grain was a labor-intensive task that could take up most of the day. But with a windmill in place, grinding grain became an almost automated process, freeing up farmers' time for other tasks. As windmills spread, they became an essential tool for local economies. Villages with windmills were able to produce more food, trade more goods, and generate more revenue. Farmers could now trade their surplus grain, something that wouldn't have been possible if they were still grinding it by hand. This shift in productivity also had a ripple effect on other industries. More time for work meant more time for craft, for socializing, and for building stronger, more prosperous communities. In these rural, medieval towns, windmills became more than just tools. They were symbols of progress. Can you imagine standing in a field, watching the windmill's blades turn with precision, knowing that each rotation was making your life a little easier, a little more predictable? The rhythm of the blades in the wind became part of the daily rhythm of life itself, the sound of progress in the air. But what's truly fascinating is that despite their enormous practical benefits, windmills also held symbolic power. They became representations of man's ability to harness nature, a quiet assertion that we could work alongside the elements, not just against them. Historians still argue over the exact role of windmills in shaping medieval society. Some suggest that windmills were the catalysts for greater efficiency and economic growth in rural areas, while others argue that they were simply one part of a larger system of technological innovations that made medieval life easier. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear. Windmills weren't just mechanical devices. They were agents of change, altering not just the landscape, but the way people lived, worked, and connected with one another. Now that we've painted the scene of how important windmills were to medieval farmers, let's take a step back and think about the very first windmills and their origins. While we often associate windmills with the Dutch countryside, their roots actually trace back to Persia around the 9th century. The windmills that made their way into medieval Europe had evolved significantly from their Persian ancestors. These early versions were rather simple, yet highly effective. Imagine yourself standing before the first windmill you've ever seen, the wooden blades creaking and turning in the wind. This wasn't the sleek, modern windmill we're familiar with today, but rather a rough, handmade structure, its wooden components held together by natural materials like hemp and pitch. The sight and sound of it must have been magical to those who first encountered it. In those early days, windmills were primarily used for pumping water and grinding grain. The Persian windmills operated on a horizontal axis, with blades that rotated like a giant paddle in the wind. As these windmills spread through Europe, they gradually evolved. By the 12th century, the medieval version of the windmill, with vertical blades mounted on a tower, was born. This new design made them more efficient, especially for grinding grain, and the impact on farming was immeasurable. You can imagine how, over time, the communities that used them began to rely on them more and more. What was once a novelty for a select few was now becoming an integral part of life for countless farmers across Europe. Historians still debate just how quickly windmills spread across medieval Europe. Some argue that they became widespread rather quickly, changing the landscape of rural life in only a few generations, while others believe it took longer for windmills to gain full acceptance. What is clear, though, is that by the 14th century, windmills had become an essential part of life, not just in Europe, but in many parts of the world. The question remains, however, how did the early farmers truly feel about these strange new machines? Were they simply curious, or did they see these windmills as a sign of something much larger, something that connected them to the natural world in a new, profound way? You can picture the first farmers waking up in the quiet dawn to the sound of the windmill's steady hum, feeling that rhythm echo in their own bodies as they set to work. It wasn't just the sound of a machine working. It was the sound of nature itself working for them. The windmill became an extension of the natural world, helping the farmer harness the forces of the wind in the same way that they had long harnessed the power of the sun to grow their crops. For these farmers, the windmill was more than just a machine. It was a new partner in their daily struggle to make the earth yield its bounty. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a soothing journey back to a time when the wind's whisper was more than just a breeze. It was the sound of life itself. Picture yourself in the midst of the lush, green countryside of medieval Europe, where farmers toiled under the heavy sun, and the rhythm of their work was guided by a steady, ever-present hum. That hum, it came from the windmills, the silent mechanical giants that powered much of rural life. Now, you probably won't survive the medieval farming lifestyle if you don't appreciate the charm of a windmill's turn. But trust me, this isn't the kind of reality you'd want to rush through. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment about where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to hear from those across the globe, relaxing with me under the soft sound of medieval history. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Windmills were more than just functional structures in the medieval countryside. They were the heartbeat of rural life. Imagine walking through the fields at dawn, the mist still hanging in the air, and in the distance, the steady whir of windmill blades turning against the breeze. It wasn't just the wind making that sound. It was the sound of progress, the promise of a bountiful harvest, and the quiet hum of civilization nestled deep in the heart of nature. The first time the windmill's blades began to turn, it must have felt like magic, a force of nature harnessed by human hands, transforming the landscape of rural Europe. Before the windmill's arrival, medieval farmers worked long, back-breaking hours to grind grain by hand. But with the windmill, things changed. The windmill didn't just grind grain, it gave farmers back their time. Instead of spending hours at a grindstone, they could now focus on tending to their crops and animals. It wasn't just an improvement in efficiency, it was a change that gave farmers a little more peace of mind, a little more time to breathe. And it wasn't just the farm that benefited. With windmills scattered across the countryside, towns and villages began to thrive, with grain being ground faster, food supplies stabilized, and commerce flourished. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of windmills in the medieval period was as revolutionary as we tend to think today, but one thing is certain. To the farmers who relied on them, those windmills weren't just machines, they were lifelines. The steady turning of the blades in the breeze was something almost meditative, a reminder that nature itself was part of their daily work, just as important as any tool or technique. For those farmers, there was no greater sound than the windmill's hum in the early morning hours.